Epic Games walked into the District Court of Rotterdam to argue about Fortnite's item shop. And the court basically told them, in polite legal language, no, you don't get to talk your way out of this with vibes. This wasn't about whether Fortnite is fun, or whether building a tower in half a second is skill. This was about how a free game can still reach into a household budget, while acting like it's doing everyone a favor. Don't worry, this voice belongs to a human who definitely pays taxes, not an AI voice box plotting global domination. Here's the scoreboard. The Netherlands Authority for Consumers and Markets, the ACM, fined Epic Games International a total of €1 million and issued a binding instruction tied to unfair commercial practices aimed at children in Fortnite. The ACM described 2 separate fines of €500,000 each, plus an instruction requiring changes to the item shop. Epic objected, and on January 14, 2026 the District Court of Rotterdam upheld the ACM's decision and declared Epic's objection unfounded. Translation: the fine stays, the instruction stays, and the legal system is not impressed by your brand aura. If your eyes glaze over at unfair commercial practices, don't worry. In human language, the case focused on how Fortnite's in-game promotions and item shop presentation pushed purchases with urgency cues and confusing information, especially for minors. Think messages like "get it now" and "buy now," and think ticking countdown timers. The ACM said that kind of pressure is illegal when it targets children, and the Rotterdam court agreed the sanctions were justified. This is the free game tax. Fortnite is free to download, so it gets to live on a console like a harmless toy. That free label lowers everyone's guard. Parents think it's just a game. Kids think it's just a game. Then the store shows up inside the toy, and it doesn't look or feel like a store you'd find in a mall. It looks like part of play. It's bright, friendly, and always one click away from spending. The product is free, but the environment is still a shop, and shops can be built to nudge. Now drop the fancy term dark patterns. It sounds like a comic book villain, but it's really just interface tricks that steer you where the company wants you to go. Make buying easy. Make thinking inconvenient. Add urgency so hesitation feels like failure. Hide clarity behind extra clicks. If you want the shortest definition, it's persuasion that pretends it's user experience. Regulators have started calling this out by name, and the Rotterdam ruling matters because it treats the interface itself as part of the commercial practice. Kids are the key here. Adults can get manipulated too, but most adults have at least some practice with budgets, regret, and the idea that limited time is often a costume. Kids don't have that muscle yet. Kids hear limited and translate it to now or never. Kids don't know that the shop rotates, that the rare skin will return, or that the real cost is not the number on the screen, but the money behind it. That's why consumer law treats children as a protected group, because they're easier to steer, easier to rush, and easier to confuse. Fortnite also isn't a solo game in a vacuum. It's a social game, and that turns a purchase into a status move. It's identity. It's group membership. It's the friend who won't stop using an emote you don't own. So, when the shop flashes a timer and the message screams urgency, it's not just selling pixels. It's selling relief from social friction. Adults call that marketing. Kids experience it as "I'm falling behind," or worse, "I'm getting left out." That's the FOMO factory, and it runs on a clock. The reporting around the ruling makes the court stance easy to translate. Epic tried to reverse parts of the required changes, including the removal of countdown timers, and the court rejected it. Epic must keep the measures in place. The shop was also described as too complex for informed decision making, with unclear timers that made it hard to understand what could be purchased and for how long. It's not just pressure, it's pressure plus confusion, which is the perfect combo for impulse buys. Here's the part people miss: judges don't care about gamer memes, brand loyalty, or your favorite streamer's locker. A court is not impressed by, but everyone does it. A court looks at law, target group, and effect. Epic's defense leaned into the classic corporate move of arguing definitions until the room gets tired. What counts as direct encouragement? What counts as misleading? What counts as aggressive? Rotterdam wasn't in a sanding mood. The court backed the ACM's conclusions and treated the shop design like what it is: marketing embedded in a game. Also, the binding instruction is the scary part. If you're a monetization manager, fines can be budgeted. Fines can be framed as the cost of doing business. Design orders mess with the funnel. Design orders change metrics. Design orders force you to explain to investors why a conversion rate dipped after you removed urgency triggers. In the ACM's description, Epic had to align the item shop with Dutch civil law by June 10, 2024. That's the legal system saying you have a deadline and we expect the design to change. One reported Dutch change is brutally simple. Minors under 18 were restricted from seeing or purchasing items that are in the shop for less than 48 hours. Read that again. The law doesn't ban spending. It slows down the short window offers for kids. Short windows are often the sharpest urgency knife, so the law dulled the blade. The instruction also aimed at clearer information about availability periods, because clarity is the enemy of impulse buys. Clarity gives you time to ask, do I want this, or do I just want to stop feeling pressured? That brings us to the most boring, most important philosophy in the whole story. Boring is better. Regulators want digital stores to be boring again. Boring means clear prices and clear timing. Boring means the shop doesn't pretend the clock is your enemy. Boring means the interface gives you room to think, instead of treating thought like a bug. Boring means you don't need a behavioral psychology degree to buy a digital hat. Boring is not anti-fun. Boring is pro-consent, and consent is supposed to be the baseline, not a speedrun. Cue the predictable comments, just parent better. Yes, parents should watch. Parents should use platform controls. Parents should talk about money early. All of that helps. But parent better is not a legal permission slip for a company to design pressure tactics aimed at children. Consumer protection exists because the world is full of systems that exploit inattention, stress, and impulse. When the buyer is a child, the bar is higher, not lower. You can't outsource fairness to the most exhausted people in the room. Another classic line is, it's optional, you don't have to buy. Sure, a purchase is technically optional, the same way a pop-up is technically optional because you can close it. The real question is whether the design is pushing a vulnerable group in ways that distort decision-making. The ACM said yes, the court said yes, and now Epic has to live with that yes. Optional is not the same as unpressured. And no, the Netherlands didn't invent this conversation last week. Epic has already been forced to answer questions about interface design and kids elsewhere. In the United States, the Federal Trade Commission announced 2 settlements in December 2022 totaling more than $500 million, including a refund component tied to allegations that design choices led to unwanted charges, and a separate penalty tied to children's privacy law enforcement. Different legal system, different case, but the same warning flare: your UI is not immune just because it's in a game. So when Rotterdam backs the ACM, it's not some tiny local slap. It's another brick in a wall being built against manipulative monetization, especially where kids are involved. It's a signal to every studio that copied the same shop template, the same timer language, the same carousel of limited offers. It's a reminder that the fun part of your game doesn't cancel out the sales part of your game. Courts can read a screen. They can look at the timer, the message, the placement, and the target audience, and then decide whether your engagement is actually unfair pressure. Europe, in particular, keeps doing this annoying thing where it treats giant companies like companies, not like cultural mascots. That's the nerds in suits energy. They don't care that a brand is beloved. They care about the rulebook and the audience. If the audience includes children, they care more. That's why the industry can't just shrug and call every fine the cost of doing business. The point is to make the cost painful enough and the obligation strict enough that copying the same tricks stops being the easy default. Let's be brutally honest about what gets exposed when a judge strips away corporate polish. The model is simple: harvest impulse, harvest urgency, harvest social pressure. Do it at scale. If the customer is a minor, the impulse is easier to trigger and the resistance is weaker. That's why the lunch money framing lands even if it sounds dramatic. The money is real even when the hat is not. The regret is real even when the purchase is only a button press. And if you think regret is rare, remember that the whole reason urgency works is that it creates regret in advance, then sells you relief. This is also why the trust us defense doesn't hold up in court. Epic can say we didn't mean it like that. Epic can say players enjoy the store. Epic can say we changed it already. Regulators don't grade intent, they grade effect. The ACM argued the practices harm children's interests and encourage purchases in ways the law forbids, and the Rotterdam court agreed. If your interface pressures kids, it doesn't matter how friendly the font is, or how cool the music is. If you're a developer watching this, you should feel 2 emotions at once. First, dread because compliance work is boring and it will slow down your monetization calendar. Second, relief because the industry desperately needs a line that says, no, you can't run behavioral experiments on kids and call it engagement. When rules get clearer, honest teams don't have to race to the bottom just to keep up with competitors who are willing to be nastier. You can sell cosmetics without turning the store into an anxiety machine. If you're a player, there's a personal angle too. Dark patterns aimed at kids are usually just dark patterns aimed at everyone, with extra sugar on top. The same urgency levers that nudge a child can nudge a tired adult after work. The difference is that kids get legal protection first, because society has agreed they should. But the moment you normalize timer pressure as a shopping default, you train an entire audience to accept manipulation as the cost of entry, and you make games feel less like games. Will this one ruling end microtransactions? No. Will it end cosmetics? No. The Dutch enforcement doesn't say no more V-Bucks. It says, stop using specific practices that pressure children and muddy clarity. That's why this case matters. It's targeted, it's about tactics, not existence. It's a legal message that certain persuasion tools are not welcome when your audience includes minors, even if your product is free to install and globally popular. And yes, the amount matters too. He won $125 is not going to bankrupt Epic. But it's not nothing, and the bigger cost is the precedent and the forced design posture. Once a court has upheld the idea that your shop presentation is an unfair commercial practice, you don't just pay and forget. You redesign, you document, you train staff. You start hearing legal review earlier, and you stop treating the store as a wild playground. A lot of studios built modern revenue around the idea that the store is the real endgame. Rotterdam just reminded them that the store is also a legal surface. So here's the headline you should keep: the free-to-play moral shield is cracked. A product can be free to install, while still being a carefully tuned machine that extracts money through psychological pressure. The Rotterdam court didn't ban Fortnite. It didn't declare gaming evil. It did something more specific and more dangerous to bad actors. It treated the shop as marketing aimed at children, and it required that marketing to follow the law. Final thought, and then you can go back to scrolling. If your monetization depends on confusing timers, urgency spam, and kids panic buying because they're afraid of being the only one without a skin, your model is fragile. It doesn't survive sunlight. It survives only when everyone shrugs and says, "That's just how games are now." Rotterdam just reminded the industry that how games are now is not the same as how games are allowed to be, and if you're still building a FOMO factory, the legal wall is getting higher. And let's be real, this is bigger than one company, because Fortnite is the template. Every publisher with a rotating shop, a daily tab, a featured tab, and a timer bar is watching this with one eye while pretending not to. The reason is simple. Once a court treats a countdown timer as more than decoration, every timer becomes potential evidence. Once a court treats Get It Now as a commercial practice aimed at children, every hype line becomes a legal risk. And once a regulator can say, "Your interface steers minors," the conversation stops being about culture and starts being about compliance. So what does better look like when the law is staring at you? It looks like honest availability windows written in plain language. It looks like a store that doesn't pretend scarcity when the item will return. It looks like fewer surprise prompts and more predictable flows. It looks like settings that default to caution for minors, not spending. It looks like confirmations that actually confirm, not speed bumps your thumb can dismiss. It looks like prices shown clearly every time in real currency terms before you commit. And for players and parents, the lesson is blunt too. If a shop is trying to rush you, it's because rushing works. Pause on purpose. Walk away on purpose. Make later a habit. The fear of missing out engine runs on the idea that you don't have time to think. Prove it wrong. If the game is fun, it will still be fun when you don't buy the hat. If your friends are real friends, they won't treat your skin slot like a moral test. And if they do, that's peer pressure, not friendship, period. Today too.